What should I do? I want to give them an S. I want to give them an A. I'll be real and give them a B. Only because we only got the one album. The unreleased album I've heard, the unreleased sophomore album, it's good, but that's unreleased, so that doesn't really count. Oh man. Man, forget it, D Roth. We gonna give them an A tier. This is my list. You can get mad if you want to. I love me some player. We putting them in the A tier. Oh, what a flagrant display of bias. Why would anyone consider that journalism? Methinks the only reason that album was displayed at all was because it shares its name with his little catchphrase. How could any reviewer rely on such a crutch to use a catchphrase? 3 stars. You know, talk about worn out catchphrases. That's the guy to talk to. Anyway, let's get to the real reason why you're here. R&B male group tier list part 2. Electric Boogaloo. Welcome back, players, for another edition of the Soul and Stereo Sessions. Thank you for joining your boy. I'm happy to have you here. And yes, you heard it right. Due to popular demand, it's time for part 2 of our R&B male group tier list. So if you missed out the action of the last time, what I did was I went to social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and asked all of our listeners to drop off their favorite R&B male groups. I took all of those names, well, some of those names, put them on a tier list, and we dropped them and ranked them by their greatness. D Roth, show the folks what they missed last time, the full tier list that we did last go round. And see, there it is for your viewing pleasure. Got some legends, got some underrated groups, got some folks, and we got Pretty Ricky. But today we're going to keep it going because I wasn't able to do the full list the last time, and along with that, many people dropped off some additional groups that they thought we should shout out. So I went to the comment section of our YouTube page, went back to Twitter, went back to IG, went to the Soul and Stereo Cypher on Facebook. Make sure you join us there if you haven't already. We talk about this stuff all day long, 24/7. So I gathered those new groups, put them on our new tier list, and D Roth, show the people what we're working with this time. Yes, this is the list that we will be ranking this time. Those groups are all at the bottom, and we're going to be placing them based on how I consider their greatness to be. And again, the placement is determined this way. We're talking vocal ability, we're talking commercial success, we're talking album quality, we're talking song quality, and most important, we're talking legacy. How are these groups remembered? That is what the rankings are determined. Unless you player, I kind of cheated with my boys. But we won't do that this time. Before we get started, you know what it is. Take a second to like this video. Show me some love. It means a lot for the algorithms if you drop that like in. And if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to the channel. A lot of y'all watching this are not subscribers, and that's crazy. You don't have to pay to subscribe. All you gotta do is hit the little button there. It means a lot to me. Not only does it encourage more of these videos, we will get more and more content rolling. So we'll have more people interaction in the comments. More is more is more. I mean, that is unfortunately the American way. So do that, and when we're done, share this with the R&B lover in your life with the share button, and don't forget to drop your thoughts in the comments. So without further ado, let's get to it. R&B male group tier list part 2. First up is Toni, or as my mom would call him, Toni Tone. Yep, that's what she called him back in the day. One of the greatest groups of the 80s and 90s, an actual band who did not just classic songs, but had some great albums as well. And of course, we all know the force of nature that Raphael Saadiq would become later on. So, I like Toni a lot, and I cannot hate on their greatness. But to be honest, they had one like stellar album. The rest of the albums were good. They never had like the super great projects that sometimes you would assume they would have because their legacy is so big. That said, they are absolutely one of the greatest R&B collectives of all time, and that's enough for a A ranking. I won't go S tier because I don't feel like they quite get over that hump, but A, no doubt. Next up is Intro, one of the greatest, in my opinion, what ifs of R&B is Intro. Their debut album is incredible. If you have not heard their debut and you call yourself an R&B fan, make sure that you prioritize that one. That album is great. And their second album, which is more forgotten, that one's actually pretty good too. In fact, I think I heard the second one first and went back to the first album back in the mid-90s. But both albums are really good. Unfortunately, their run was cut short. They broke up. They lost their frontman, Kenny Green, in 2001, who in my opinion, if he stuck around, would have been one of those producers and writers that we talk about today as one of the greats. He was exceptional and did so much great work. Unfortunately, we lost him way too soon. They had so much A potential, but I think I gotta put them at B just because some of it was so unrealized. What we got was incredible. We just did not get enough of it. They're great though. Next up is Portrait. Honestly, I don't have a whole lot of memories of Portrait. My main memories when they were on Family Matters and they did Here We Go Again. Here We Go Again, of course, was their big song. And unfortunately, because the 90s was so hot for R&B and there were just so many groups out there, I feel like they kind of got lost in the shuffle. They were a solid group, had good songs, but a little lost in the sauce a bit for me. So I'm gonna go with C for Portrait. Good group, good song, but really not enough to kind of put them any higher without stretching it. Next up is Sons of Funk, and I already know who picked this. Shout out to James from the Soul and Stereo Cypher. The biggest No Limit stan I have ever seen. My man be embarrassing himself. Anyway, shout out to James. But I'm sure James put them here because he loves some No Limit, and these guys were part of that No Limit collective in the late 90s. They only had a couple of albums, to be honest, but their main claim to fame was Pushing Inside of You, the most gross sounding but kind of awesome song you will ever hear. They just didn't do much other than like a couple features on a few artists. I was not a big fan of Sons of Funk, but that song is so great. That single is so great. I can't give them a player pleaser. That song is so good. I'm gonna move them to C. You're lucky I don't have anything lower than C other than player please, because they might have landed there, but I'll put them in C just because that song was so dope. Only thing to say, me, y'all. Next up is Earth, Wind, and Fire, and I'm not even going to waste my breath because if I have to explain to anybody listening to this why this group is anything other than S tier, you are on the wrong video. D Roth, cue up the horn. S tier. S tier for sure. The template for modern day R&B in many ways is Earth, Wind, and Fire. The elements, man, S tier. I'm not wasting my breath. Y'all know what it is. Okay, here's an interesting one. No Guidance. A lot of y'all might not even know No Guidance, and I was actually pretty happy to see so many people in the comments shout them out. So they've only been around a couple of years as a group, at least to my knowledge, but they have a lot of promise. They, in fact, just had a single that came out a few days before this recording, and it's pretty good. They don't have a full album yet. They had an EP, I believe, last year that again was very, very promising. They have just the the nuts and bolts for a good traditional R&B group. They're actually singing. The songwriting is strong. The songs are pretty fun and catchy, but they don't have quite that hit yet, and we don't have the album yet. So honestly, it's a little tough to rank them because I feel like I'm ranking them off of potential. I'm just going to be conservative and put them in the C tier. And I know some of y'all are coming for my throat for that, because this is not a diss at all. Just don't have really enough right now to say where they should be. If they drop an album soon and it's dope, absolutely we're going B, because I think these guys are pretty solid. But right now we're just talking about maybes, and I can't go too much higher than that. But keep your eye on No Guidance. They might have something. Alright, next is H-Town. I'll be honest, players. I did not like H-Town when I was younger, when I was a kid. Knocking Boots, oh my god, they played that song to death, and I did not like it. I still don't like it today. It just, even in middle school, that song was just like kind of immature sounding. I don't know. I just never liked that song, and today I still don't like it. But I did like them when they came out later on in the mid-90s with They Like It Slow and A Thin Line Between Love and Hate. I'm like, okay, these brothers actually be singing. I like this a lot. So they can be hit and miss for me personally. Their albums are solid. They definitely got the legacy because they got some pretty memorable songs for that era. So I think I'll go safe and give them a B tier and take my personal feelings out of it. Can't hate on them because they do have some dope stuff, but man, I still don't like Knocking Boots. This is dumb. And like, what does that even mean? Like, how does that even translate for a term about sex? How's knocking? It sounds like something you do when you're kicking the snow off of your shoes. Not sexy, brothers. Alright, next on the list is After 7. After 7 is basically what I said about Silk in the last video. Except, minus all the freaky stuff that was going on. So, people tend to remember the one big song that they had, which in this case is Ready or Not. Just like Silk, they don't remember Freak Me. But they have many, 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 many more songs, incredible performances, great albums, and they had a couple of albums out maybe 4 or 5 years ago that were as good as the albums of their peak era. I mean, they have been in quality across the board, incredibly reliable as artists. To me, easy A tier for After 7. A for After. Next up are the Shy Lights. The Shy Lights are another group that are known mainly today for a couple of songs. Have you seen her? Tell me, have you seen her? But despite that, their legacy is pretty long lasting. From 1971 to about, 73 or so. Them brothers had it on lock. Unfortunately, while their legacy is much longer than that, their heights weren't as high as that early 70s range. So they had their big peak and then they were like around for a long, long time. They weren't just at that level later on. Because of that, I can't give them S tier, but because their legacy is still very, very strong, they're a good A tier for me. I think they work well there. Force MDs, we're at them next. And they're another one of those great groups from the 80s that you don't hear enough about today. Outside of a song or two, Here I Go Again, Tender Love, you hear about those. Tender Love gets sampled all the time. But they had a really long-lasting run for the 80s. They're pretty much around the entire 80s and maybe even to the 90s a little bit. So, kind of like I don't want to call them the Shy Lights of the 80s. That's a little bit much. But much like I said there, they had a kind of small window for peak, but they were around a long time. So I can't take that away from them. That's enough for a B tier to me. They're pretty good. They're well remembered, but not top tier. Alright, next up is ATL, and if you remember these brothers, you get the gold star for today, because they are a little on the obscure side. So shout out whoever dropped that one down in our list. I like having something to shake the table a little bit. ATL was from ATL, and they were a bunch of brothers from the mid-2000s who had a relatively big push at the time. They had Jazzy Faye that was doing a lot of production. They had big name guests like Sierra all over their albums. They even had a song written by, you know who, R&B's Voldemort, the urine man himself. And he did their big song, Calling All Girls, and that song did pretty okay. But they broke up almost as soon as they got together. They didn't really capitalize off the momentum of that album. And if I remember right, the album wasn't bad. I will say... C tier. Let's do C tier. Yeah, we'll do C. We'll do C. I didn't think they were a bad group. We just didn't get enough of them, and they came and went so quickly. I was gonna do Player Please, but that might be a little bit unfair, so C it is. Y'all caught me on a good day, ATL. Up next is Rough Endz. I always liked these guys, and I think it was because they stood out because of their raspiness, their raspy vocals. It made them sound so mature. How was your day, baby? All you need? Like, it made them just stand out from the crowd, and I like that they were able to put that soulfulness into their stuff. But they're another group that's only remembered for a couple songs. You had No More, and you had Someone to Love You. But they had pretty okay albums. They had an album a couple years ago that wasn't bad, actually. I think it made my top 50 albums of the year list. It was pretty solid. That said, a few good singles and some okay albums. I can only go so high with you on that one. My heart says B, but I think D Roth, let's do C tier for Rough Endz. Some good songs, but man, just not enough in the legacy category to catapult them up a bit. Now, speaking of legacies, this is one with no question. We talking about the OJs. We did the Levert on the last list, and now we got the patriarch of R&B themselves, the OJs. Another group that's just classic after classic, iconic songs, and they've dominated, a band that just dominated the 70s. When you can stand out so high in R&B's arguably their greatest era, you know you're onto something. The fact that songs like Love's Train today are continually sampled and continually covered by modern groups, it just shows you how great they are. Man, this one is a no-brainer. Break out the horns. S tier, S tier, S tier, yes. S tier for the OJs. Easy. Alright, next up is Next. Hey. See what I did there. Next up is Next. So, like H-Town, I was not the biggest fan of Next during their big run, and I will tell you why. If any one of you had the unfortunate pleasure to live through this planet in 1998, you heard their song, Too Close, 100 times a day. I don't want to hear anybody complaining about them playing Not Like Us that much. That ain't nothing. You survive listening to that freaking Too Close every second of the day. I'm not joking. I grew up in Virginia. In 1998, I was living in Virginia. We had 4 stations that played hip-hop and R&B. And you would kind of just like skip through them when one was at commercials or playing a song you didn't like. I'm kidding y'all not. There was a time where all 4 stations were simultaneously playing Next Too Close. I almost ran off the road. I know this is great for them. I'm glad their pockets are lined, but my brain was melting. I cannot stand that song, and I cannot, if I never hear that song again, it'll be 200 years too soon. Beyond that song, they are a very strong group. RL, of course, has become one of the more remembered vocalists of that era. They had plenty of good songs that were not too close. The albums were pretty solid too. The production was good, but they always felt a tier below the Jagged Edges and 112s and Drew Hills. They were always like on that second tier. So for that, I'm going to have to say B. B for them. They can go in B tier, but Too Close, we're going to put that in Player Please. I'm still traumatized by that annoying song. Alright, next up is Troop. I can't wait to get to school each day. Oh my gosh, I love me some Troop. And if you grew up in the 90s, you love Troop too. Those little boys were singing. Their version of All I Do Is Think of You. They had Spread My Wings, where they were dancing around on the roof with like the helicopters, like they were, like the FBI was going to get them. The video made no sense, who cares, but the song was dope. I love Troop because they were incredible vocalists for their age. And then the production was so expertly done. The arrangements were incredible. Those dudes had it. And I kind of hate that they ran out of steam so soon. They seemed like they were setting up for a much longer run that we never got. They're a group that I feel like if you tinker with their sound, they could absolutely continue that into the later 90s when we got to the hip hop soul era. They would have done just fine. So I wish we got more Troop because they were so good at what they did. But for what we got, I'm going to have to give them B tier. I want to give them higher, but that's all we got. That's all we got. Oh man, it's time. It's time. Yes, it's time. It is time. We got Levert. We got Johnny Gill. We got King Keith Sweat. We got LSG. S tier, S tier, S tier. Where are my horns? Why don't I have S tier? D Roth, where are the horns? I'm not hearing my horns for S tier. I see you. He's right. He's right. All right. I will be unbiased this time. It is no secret that if you know me, I love Johnny Gill, my favorite New Edition member. I love Gerald Levert's. And yes, Keith Sweat is that dude forever and a day. You already know this. So when three of my favorite vocalists of all time decided to get together for a supergroup, I lost my mind. I did not believe what I was seeing in 1997. And the album they put out lived up to the hype. Incredible album and memorable songs. My Body was one of the biggest R&B songs of that era. And the album has lots of cuts too. So great first run. If I'm being unbiased, the second run wasn't so great, and I bet some of y'all were like, second run? I didn't even know they had a second album. And that's the problem. They had another album in 2003, I believe. That album was not very good. I did like Just Friends. I thought it was a cool single. But it wasn't enough there. It was a notch below. Why do I have to be the unbiased one? Why can't I be like everybody else and just stand out and just make up ratings? Let's give LSG a B tier rating. S in my heart though. S in my heart. Okay, speaking of supergroups, now we are at TGT. The internet was going crazy in the early 2010s. Tyrese, Genuine, Tank come together. They're going to be this era's LSG. They're going to put out an album. They're going to drop hits. It's going to be so great to just bring fire to their careers, especially at a time when R&B was getting a little suspect. Wasn't completely bottomed out, but we needed some fire. We didn't get fire. I know a lot of people like this album. I did not. I thought the TGT album was quite meh. I like Take It Wrong. I thought that was a good song, but with all the hype, I only got one song that I sort of play all these years later and nothing else. I don't think that it was as solid as it should have been. And the fact that we haven't gotten anything since, and we probably aren't getting anything after the conflict within the group. There's a lot of people that love TGT. I'm not one of them. I think it kind of underperformed a bit. They're going to have to go C tier. Alright, next we have Blackstreet. And it's one of the premier groups of the 90s. Everybody knows Blackstreet, but like After 7, like Silk, like we've talked about before, this is another one of those groups that's defined by one song. In this case, it's No Diggity. And quite frankly, I don't even really like that song like that. But they have so many other great songs beyond that. They're another level album. That's another one of the better albums of the 90s in my opinion. But their debut was great. They gave us great singles beyond that. The Dave Hollister era of that group to me was peak Blackstreet. But even after he left, they were still able to maintain a level of consistency and solid work. But to me, there are like two eras of Blackstreet. The early era and then the second half. Second half of Blackstreet, not so great. That one was a little weaker than we got before. And for that reason, I can't go as high as I probably would like to. If they maintain the level that they had before, they'd be an A. I'm going to have to drop them to a B because the later stuff was there. It kind of cratered out there near the end. Alright, now we're sticking with the Teddy Riley groups with Guy. If you ask me which R&B group is synonymous with New Jack Swing, kinda gotta go with Guy. Their first two albums were huge. It put Teddy Riley on the map. He was already doing stuff with Keith Sweat, but this is the one that really elevated him. And in my opinion, really the group that helped elevate New Jack Swing into this sound that people still love today. I'll get on my New Jack Swing rant another time. I like New Jack Swing, but like everything, y'all ran it into the ground. But unlike today, at least they knew when to call it quits, and we're not 10 years deep still hearing old stuff. But beyond that, there still was a great star-making vehicle for Teddy Riley. Aaron Hall went on to have a good solo career himself. R. Kelly stole all of his stuff. Trust and believe that. I stand on business. He stole his whole steez. That's what happened. But Guy the group still maintained this legacy of being a forerunner and like trendsetter for New Jack Swing. Great singles. Albums were good too. They had a later album back in the later on in the decade. It wasn't that great, but the other ones were still strong enough to kind of overshadow that one. Let's give them an A tier. I think they deserve it. Okay, now we got Men of Vision. I love these guys. Another forgotten R&B group. I'm not sure who nominated them, but shout out to you. Giving y'all props today because I love me some Men of Vision. Because I love the song Housekeeper. Great song, one of my favorite songs. If that song came out today, y'all would be talking about, oh, there's some simps. They're simping. They're simping for love. But you know what? They got it. That's the difference. You simp for love, you get it. Today, y'all don't do anything and you're miserable. Maybe if you simped some more, like Men of Vision, and you said you were going to clean a lady's house, maybe you would feel better about yourself. That's all I'm saying. Anyway, to be objective, Men of Vision didn't have a lot going on besides that Housekeeper era of music. Stuff was good, but it just wasn't enough to build upon it, so gotta go C tier for Men of Vision. Housekeeper is S tier in my heart though. Alright, now we got B5. So in the mid-2000s, B5 was like the natural successor of B2K. Once they kind of went away, we had B5. Feeling that teen heartthrob kind of vibe and roll for a bit. But it just didn't last long. Kind of like B2K themselves. They kind of ran out of gas quickly. But unlike B2K and Immature, they didn't have the big songs that people remember. They had some alright joints. They had a Like Truth. They also had a All I Do Is Think of You cover. It was alright. Everything about B5 was just alright. And that kind of takes them away from being to that next level. But they weren't bad though. I can't say they were a bad group. It was just a whole bunch of alright. C tier for B5. I'm sure some B5 maniacs from the mid-2000s will be upset, but sorry about your nostalgia. That's what I'm here for. Nostalgia killer. Alright, it's another easy one. The Temptations. In my opinion, the greatest R&B group maybe ever. Maybe they are the greatest group ever. Maybe I need to dial that back and think before somebody screenshots this and says that I have proclaimed it that. But off the top of my head, I don't think of too many groups that can outdo the Temptations. I know some of y'all only know them for the Christmas song, Merry Christmas from the Temptations. But come on, y'all. These brothers got way more than that. More than 70 top 40 singles. Who is doing that like that? And don't say nobody has 70 singles. I seen Chris Brown's albums. He got 70 singles per album. So no. They are incredible with an incredible legacy. The only knock I have is they have more members than the New World Order and WCW back in the day. And they continue to switch those brothers out. But even then, they still maintain a level of R&B greatness. Absolutely, without question, S-tier group. S-tier group, easily. Come on now, y'all making this easy. Now the Gap Band, another classic cookout group. Charlie Wilson has become one of the most enduring voices of R&B, and it all started here way back in the 70s. And again, they dominated the 70s, came into the 80s, still doing their thing, and 40 years later you got Uncle Charlie still popping up on people's songs with pristine vocals. This dude is incredible, and it shows how much talent can be ageless. If you are truly talented, there is no age limit on that. And as far as the Gap Band, if you ever been to a black function, a black cookout, anywhere, you have heard something from the Gap Band. That is, to me, a true legacy. When you talk about something that's a classic or a cultural shift or iconic, y'all talking about songs that trend on Twitter for like 2 days. We're talking about songs that have endured for lifetimes, that when it comes on, everyone recognizes. That's the legacy of the Gap Band. Y'all already know that I don't have to even tell you the consonant, but I will. S tier. S tier for the Gap Band for sure, for sure. Ooh, another one of my favorites, Soul For Real. I love these guys because, like, kind of true. They had this harmonizing thing that just sounded incredible. And because the ages of the members were just so stark, you had like the youngest ones and the oldest ones, and they just, you could hear the different levels of vocals within the song. It wasn't 5 clones. You could hear the different pitches, and that made for an interesting experience. And they were paired with Heavy D, who gave them hits, man. Hits. They had the skating rinks on lock in 95 and 96. And again, these songs are still classics today that endure. That I'm sure I could play these for 19-year-olds and they would recognize these songs. The only problem is they just really couldn't break out of that kind of mid-90s era, whereas a lot of the other groups around them evolved and got bigger. They were kind of locked in that set, and they weren't able to kind of expand their sound and mature and grow. That's the only thing that holds against them, because for their era, they are great. But because they weren't able to maintain that legacy going forward, gotta give them a B tier. No shade though, because they're wonderful. Love me some Soul For Real. Okay, now we're back to the kiddie groups with Mindless Behavior. Man, y'all are dragging some of these groups out of the mothballs. So we talked about New Edition in the 80s. We talked about Immature in the 90s. We talked about B2K in the early 2000s. B5 in the mid 2000s. And in the early 2010s, we had Mindless Behavior. And I can't front, that Mrs. Right song, that, as the kids say, was a bop. I still might pull up Mrs. Right on this song, on this little phone right here, because I kind of like that joint. Besides that, not a whole lot going on. They did receive a lot of awards at their time. BT loves a boy band. They love a little kiddie group. So they were kind of the last group pushed in that 106 and Park era. So they got a lot of pub. They got a lot of press for that. But now that I think about it, I might need to revive the Whatever Happened To column on soulandstereo.com to talk about these guys. Because, boy, they got some stories. I mean, it's folks getting arrested. It's alleged drug abuse. Folks wilding out. That group has some interesting history. But really, beyond just the Mrs. Right era, there's not really much going on. I'm going to give them a C. Even though they on that player please line for sure. Mrs. Right is dope, and they were pretty high profile thanks to just the buzz around the group at their peak. So I'm gonna give them C tier. They just got over the hump. Ooh, another one I love, Midnight Star. Yes, I'm a big Midnight Star fan because they had hits on hits on hits. Midas Touch is one of my favorite songs of all time. My wife will tell you that because she gets so annoyed when I sing that dumb song. They epitomize 80s R&B to me. I mean, Operator Engine Number 9, Curious. They had hits like just back to back. They were so... When I think about my early days of music and my young days of R&B, and I didn't even know what their name was at the time, but I know that they put out songs that I liked. And when I grew up and learned more about music, I'm like, oh, they put out all the songs I like. Love me some Midnight Star. These are great. I love Midnight Star. Only thing that keeps them from S tier, though, if I'm trying to be unbiased, is that, I don't know, they don't have the influence that some of the other groups in that tier have. They have lots of great hits, but I can't think of any groups that would come after them that's like, oh, I was clearly influenced by Midnight Star. I'm sure that some were just by osmosis but I can't think of too many groups that were a direct reflection of them, other than just covering their songs or sampling their music. So I'm going to go A tier. But again, I love these folks. Love me some Midnight Star. Big part of my childhood right there. Next up is Men at Large. I like them. I know I'm probably in the minority, but I like some Men at Large. They were discovered by Gerald Levert, and they were just some big old boys that had vocals. They were body positivity before y'all had think pieces and Twitter to yell about. Their biggest claim to fame, of course, is the single So Alone, which is still dope today. It was a jam, but beyond that, I can't really think of much else I can say beyond that objectively that they had to add. They're another group that his R&B sound began to shift in the mid-90s and going into the late 90s. I feel like if they would have updated their sound a bit, they would have been able to maintain. Look, hip-hop loves a big brother. Big Pun, Big E. People love a big... If they like really lean into hip-hop, I think they could have been something. Look, Fat Joe, he's still around doing it, although he ain't really fat anymore. But I love that those guys, what they brought to the table in the early 90s, they just weren't able to maintain it throughout the decade. Gotta be honest, I gotta go C tier with them for that. I love them, I love the debut album, but just not much to hang their hat on after that. And finally, Belle Biv DeVoe, the offshoot of New Edition BBD. So, y'all ain't gonna like this one, but I'm gonna have to keep it a buck. I think a lot of BBD's legacy is tied to New Edition. And deservedly so, because they are so New Edition adjacent. They're seen as automatic legends. Poison, of course, is a true iconic song, a legit iconic song. But they only really had one good album. They had some okay albums, and they had one album that was, that thing was booty juice. Doo-doo smoothie. Do not like that other album. But I struggle because they're seen almost, some people put them on the level of New Edition because they are New Edition. But to me, they were an offshoot that did well, but most of their stuff, it doesn't hold a candle to New Edition. So they got one good song, well, one very memorable song. They have actually some decent songs. They had a comeback album a few years ago that was alright. It's just a lot of alright to me. So I'm gonna have to go, I gotta go C tier, y'all. I gotta go C tier. They had the one iconic song. They had some stuff here and there, but the other stuff beyond 1990 was just so hit or miss, or straight up hit the wall. I can't give them props for that. Sorry, y'all. Gotta go C tier for BBD. New Edition, though, you know they are much higher on the list. Alright, we are done. D Roth, show the good people the finished product. Yep, that is it. That is our tier list, round 2 of our male R&B groups. Don't it look beautiful? So beautiful, don't you agree? So, there you go. Now it's your turn. Ready for y'all to weigh in. What do you think? Which way would you put them? Where are your favorites? Where would you switch some of these around? I know y'all have some feelings on a couple of these, but that's where we stand for now. And my biggest question for you is, what do we do next? Do we do round 3 of the male R&B groups, or is it time to shift over and do the ladies, the female R&B group tier list?
Yes, show the ladies some love. Yes, that's what you need to do next.
What is she doing here? She only pops up when we talk about Beyonce. Well, why are you here?
Well, you're gonna be talking about Beyonce because when you do the female list, obviously you gotta talk about Destiny's Child.
Yeah, she's got me there. Anyway, y'all let me know in the comments what you think. Is it time to move over, or is it time to get out of here? You know what I think. Anyway, this edition of the Soul and Stereo Sessions is a wrap. I'll see y'all on the next tier list. Play on, players.